He mocked a legend, turned a charity fight into a circus. But when Chuck Norris stepped into the ring, silence fell. And what followed wasn't a match. It was a masterclass. In the Iron Circle Arena of Las Vegas, a young upstart champion was about to make a benefit bout a one-man show. A dazzling exhibition of boxing became suddenly deadly serious when a living legend was publicly taunted. Chuck Norris was no ordinary VIP guest. For more than 20 years, he was the best of the best in the martial arts. A six-time world karate champion renowned for redefining contemporary combat with incomparable discipline and ageless technique. Faced with defeat when undefeated showboating boxer Ramy Blitz Delgado, a monster fan favorite, hurled the gauntlet at him before a baying crowd, he was unaware he was climbing into the ring with the personification of silent mastery. Chuck retaliated with wordless precision that would unleash a reckoning far outside the ropes. What started as a viral prank would turn into a legacy-defining moment. The fight capital of the world would never be the same after Chuck Norris schooled the loudest man in the room. The true meaning of power. Before we get back to it, let us know where you're listening from. And if this episode speaks to you, be sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've got something extra special in store for you. The Iron Circle Arena in Las Vegas pulsed with charged excitement. Spotlights cast over the crowded stands as announcers' voice boomed through speakers, sending the crowd into delirium. Tonight's charity match had attracted celebrities, socialites, and boxing fans from all over the country to witness Blitz Ramy Delgado defend his unbeaten record. Ladies and gentlemen, the deep baritone of Jules Kinsey ringed through the broadcast booth that overlooked the arena. Welcome to Fight Night for Futures, in which boxing's stars bring cash to America's youth programs. Aya Chen sat beside him, finger-typing across her tablet. At 28, she embodied the new age of sport journalist, fast, tech-savvy, and not impressed by anything that could not be reduced to viral content. "Quite the show tonight, Jules," she said, pointing toward the entrance tunnel where pyrotechnics were being arranged. Ramy's entrance alone cost more than most fighters make in a year. Jules relaxed back in his chair, the creases around his eyes deepening. 20 years as a fighter, and another 15 behind the microphone, had taught him to look past the flash. There used to be a time when fighters let their fists speak. His eyes drifted towards the VIP section. Talking of which, we have a legend here tonight. The camera cut to a man sitting calmly in the front row, Chuck Norris, wearing a plain black button-down shirt and jeans. Unlike other celebrities who swooned and posed for cameras, Chuck sat with easy ease, nodding every now and then to fans who approached him with respectful distance. Next to him, Ethan Delroy, silver-haired but still broad-shouldered, watched the arena with practiced scrutiny. "Chuck Norris," Jules went on, his voice softening with respect. "Six-time world karate champion, Hollywood legend, and possibly the most disciplined fighter of his generation." Aya's eyebrows arched slightly. "My dad had his posters up when I was a kid. Didn't know he still came to these things." "He doesn't do it often," Jules responded, "which makes tonight special already." The lights flickered and dimmed, then the din of the crowd welled up into a roar. Smoke poured from the entrance tunnel like bass. Rafters shook to heavy music. Ramy Blitz Delgado, 25, unbeaten and basking in adoration like a starved fish in water, pushed through the haze. His silk robe shone under the spotlights, emblazed with his logo and crystalline studs that reflected every camera flash. Ramy Blitz Delgado coming in with his signature entrance. Aya declared, energy raising her voice. 27 victories, no defeats, 19 by knockout. Social media star with more than 15 million following, and against seasoned fighter Miguel Steady Santos, Jules added, whose experience is hoped to beat Delgado's youth and speed. As Ramy approached the ring, he discarded his robe in dramatic flair, displaying a body tone for power as well as Instagram. He skipped on his toes, whipping shadow punches in the direction of his fans who shrieked back at him. His coach, T-Bone Mercer, sat in his corner, face impassive under his old baseball cap. The experienced trainer's eyes weren't on his boxer, but on the fight-Tacoma habit of 30 years of waiting for things to go wrong. In the opposite corner, Miguel Santos remained quiet. At 36, his face bore the hard truth of a journeyman fighter, scars over his eyes, a slightly off-kilter nose, calloused knuckles that spoke of endless wars. He made the sign of the cross, eyes shut in quick prayer. Behind him, in the stands, Chuck Norris sat in quiet that was a counterpoint to the turmoil about him. In contrast to the yelling spectators, he watched with the analytical gaze of one who saw what was really going on beneath the spectacle. "Ethan," Chuck spoke softly, his first sentence since arriving. "This kid has talent behind all that showboating." Ethan nodded, bending closer to be heard above the din. Shame he doesn't know it himself. The bell clanged, its loud ring splitting the din of the arena. Ramey burst from his corner like a compressed spring, covering the distance with blinding speed. Miguel hardly had a chance to raise his guard before Ramey began unleashing combinations at a furious pace. Left jab, right cross, left hookage punch, thrown with surgical accuracy despite theatrical flair. Delgado coming out aggressive as always, Jules observed. That's his trademark overwhelming opponents before they can get into rhythm. Miguel weathered the first onslaught inside the ring, his experience enabling him to roll with punches while searching for an opening, but Ramey never gave him a moment to breathe, cutting off the ring with footwork that belied years of discipline under the flashy veneer. Halfway through the first round, Ramey caught Miguel with a clean right hook that sent the veterans reeling backward. The crowd exploded, but rather than pressing his advantage, Ramey recoiled, arms spread wide, playing to the crowd. "You getting tired already, old man?" He taunted loudly enough for the front rows to hear. Miguel's eyes folded into slits, pride propelling him forward. Maybe too rapidly, he made a counterattack that Ramey dodged with ease, then punished with a lethal uppercut. "Fantastic counter by Delgado!" Aya cried, already on her phone typing post-fight reportage. Jules' tone stayed unfazed. Brilliant. Yes. Necessary showmanship? No. The round went on with Ramey switching between dazzling technique and crowd-pleasing play. When Miguel threw a good body shot, Ramey overacted a grimace before winking at a camera. When he had Miguel cornered on the ropes, he looked about, taking in the VIP area, before releasing his combination. He's acting instead of fighting. Chuck grumbled to Ethan, who nodded in silent confirmation. With the round almost over, Ramey collapsed left, pulling Miguel's defense high, before firing a crushing right hook to the body, followed by a blindingly rapid left to the jaw. The collision reverberated around the arena. Miguel's legs went out from under him and he fell to the canvas with a ghastly thud. The referee jumped in between them at once, flapping his arms wildly as medical personnel rushed into the ring. Ramey never waited for the decision. He was already making his way around the ring, going up ropes in all four corners, flexing for photographers, and blowing kisses to the crowd. "First round knockout," Aya declared, hardly able to contain her enthusiasm. Ramey Blitz Delgado is still unbeaten in dazzling style. Jules observed as paramedics treated Miguel, who was now sitting up but obviously dazed. Santos must be okay. That was a crisp shot. The arena throbbed with energy as Ramey took his victory lap. He pulled the microphone away from the ring announcer, panting hard but smiling with unbridled victory. "That's how it's done," he yelled, voice resounding through the speakers. 28-0. Who's next? Who's got the courage to get in here with the Blitz? The crowd chanted his name in waves. Blitz, Blitz, Blitz. Cameras swept across the arena, their lenses recording the jubilation before focusing back on the VIP area. Chuck Norris sat still, face unmoved, neither celebrating nor condemning what he'd just seen. This stillness, this total control, was such a jarring contrast with the turmoil around him that it had its own gravity. Ramy caught mid-celebration, his gaze fixed on Chuck's calm demeanor. There was something to that quiet, that lack of response that needled him in ways the applause could not calm. He gestured specifically at Chuck, still holding a microphone. "Hey, Norris," he shouted, sweat beading on his shoulders. "I notice you sitting there all quiet. What's wrong? Don't like seeing how real fighters get it done these days?" A murmur of gasps rippled through the crowd. Jules leaned forward suddenly. Aya's fingers hesitated over her tablet. "Is he?" she started. "He is," Jules agreed, his voice thick with disbelief. Ramy, riding the shock of the crowd, doubled down. "You made some nice movies back in the day, but this is real life. This is what fighting looks like in 2025. Ethan shifted in the VIP section, but Chuck put a steadying hand on the friend's arm. His face was unreadable, eyes fixed on the young champion, who waved wildly in his direction. "You want to test whether those roundhouse kicks translate to a real ring? I've got time tonight," Ramy laughed, playing the crowd. "Or are you too busy making commercials for old man vitamins?" The crowd's response divided. Some laughed nervously. Others dissolved into awkward silence as a small faction started a tentative chant. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" In the broadcast booth, Jules took off his headset, sitting back on a slow exhalation. That kid has no idea what he's doing. Ayla glanced from Jules inside the ring, confusion written on her. World Karate Champion and action film star appears to be accepting a challenge from Ramy Delgado following some provocative comments after Delgado's victory over Miguel Santos. Provocative is putting it mildly. Jules added, "In my experience, the quietest fighters often carry the most dangerous skills, and Chuck Norris has always let his abilities speak for themselves." In the ring, Ramy bounced softly on the balls of his feet, shaking out his arms and rolling his head from side to CDI. Loose, confident performance that didn't quite extend into his eyes. Facing him, Chuck remained immobile, his breathing level. "Stare firm." "No referee, no rules," Ramy taunted, working the crowd once more. "Or do you want to do it right?" Chuck's solution was to walk into the middle of the ring, hands by his sides, feet placed in a subtle stance that only trained fighters would notice, balanced, grounded, ready. The informal nature of the fight left everybody in doubt about procedures. No bell would sound, no referee would begin the action. This was something more primal challenge and response prior to modern sport. Ramy, coming to the realization that Chuck was not going to offer any more preamble, slowly made his way to the center of the ring. His usual swagger mixed with fresh reservation. The crowd took a collective breath, 10,000 individuals frozen in the instant prior to collision. "Last chance to back out," Ramy said, raising his arms into fighting stance. The words were missing his previous mock area final gut warning before crossing a line that could not be uncrossed. Chuck did not react other than to lift his own hands, not in the traditional boxing guard, but in the wider guard of a martial. Artist used to having attack vectors available from more than one direction. His face did not change, intent, present, unruffled by outside worries. Something in that serenity finally broke through Ramy's confidence. For the first time that evening, perhaps the first time in his adult life, real doubt crossed his face. Before him wasn't a faded icon or a publicity stunt, but something he hadn't planned for. Real mastery, unmixed with ego or theatrics. At that moment of awareness, Ramy did what he always did. When unsure, he attacked. His first jab shot out with dizzying speed, the same technical accuracy that had sent Miguel Santos minutes before. It was a testing jab to gauge distance and reflex time, thrown with the assurance of a fighter who did not often miss. But now the target wasn't present. Chuck's avoidance hadn't been theatrical or showy. He was just not where the punch had hit. Having transferred his weight with very little movement economy gained through decades of experience. Before Ramy might register the miss, Chuck had already retreated back to his original stance, still infuriatingly tranquil. Ramey's face clouded with confusion, then hardened into grit. He set himself to a combination jab, cross-hookage punch delivered with technical precision, both meeting nothing but air as Chuck slid, parried, and deflected with subtle maneuvers that appeared to read Ramey's intent before it could materialize. The audience, at first booming with anticipation, eventually calmed down as the strange nature of the fight became evident. This was not a free-for-all or a technical demonstration. It was almost as if viewing a master classer, or perhaps better, a lesson. Ramey pushed forward, frustration eclipsing his training. His punches were quicker, stronger, less accurate. Sweat shot from his hair as he dumped more weight into each punch. Refusing to be reached by the elusive legend, Chuck kept dodging. His movements so slight they seemed almost like optical illusions. He did not counter, did not attack, merely denied Ramey the pleasure of contact. With every miss, the young champion's patience unraveled farther. Stand and fight. Ramey finally bellowed, voice shaking with anger. The words suspended there, telling more about their source than about the object of their fury. In the tirade lay the fundamental truth. Ramey Blitz Delgado, unbeaten champion and internet sensation, never did learn to take no for an answer. Chuck's reaction wasn't one of words. He just ceased backing away. The transition was so subtle that everyone else failed to notice. But Ramey sensed it right away, as if crashing full speed into an invisible wall. The space that he had been chasing was now solid earth, held by unmovable presence. Chuck shifted offensively for the first time during the confrontation, but not with reckless flailing or power shots, only with a single direct palm strike to Ramey's sternum. The effect wasn't dramatic to watch, but Ramey reeled backward as if struck by something considerably heavier. Air visibly exhaling from his lungs. The eyes of the young champion grew wide with true astonishment. That one touch had packed more concentrated power than punches he'd taken from heavyweights. Before he could regain his stance, Chuck had already returned to neutral position, arms up, balance impeccable, giving not a clue that he had just shown something phenomenal. At the broadcast booth, Jules leaned forward, voice in a hushed tone full of awe. That, ladies and gentlemen, is decades of well-practiced discipline. Not power from muscle, but power from impeccable alignment and timing. Aya gazed at the ring, her initial disbelief overcome by mounting amazement. I've never seen anything like this. He's not even moving. And still, Delgado can't reach him because he's struggling against the one foe no fighter can defeat, Jules said. His own pride. Down ringside, T-Bone gazed with grim confirmation, like a man seeing the prophecy fulfilled that he'd attempted to thwart. Next to him, other trainers and fighters looked on in professional silence, knowing they saw something unusual and special. Ethan Delroy had edged closer to the ring, Chuck's watch still clutched in his hand. His earlier fear had given way to subdued pride, not astonishment at his friend's skill, but satisfaction at the truth being brought out. In the ring, Ramey had caught his breath, but something else was different. The arrogant grin vanished, covered by narrowed intent and clenched teeth. His gaze swept across Chuck's body, seeking out flaws, openings, anything he could use. Finding nothing in the legend's flawless poise, he turned to the only option devastating offense. Letting loose a guttural utterance that was half growl, half war cry, Ramey charged forward, unloading a whirlwind of attacks that would have battered most opponents senseless through mere quantity and determination. His style was still there. Hooks, uppercuts, and crosses intermeshing smoothly with each other, but now driven by something less clinical than flair. The ring was a blur of action for a few seconds as Ramey went at Chuck from every direction, driving him back to the ropes with inexorable force. The crowd erupted into life again, feeling the momentum shift, anticipating the younger man's ferocity to finally be effective. Chuck yielded ground intentionally, his defense evolving from evasiveness to deflection, hands catching and redirecting Ramey's power instead of avoiding it altogether. To the untrained observer, it may have appeared he was getting overpowered. To those privy to the ways of combat, it was something else entirely. He was gathering intelligence, reading patterns, letting Ramey open himself. As Ramey charged with a big hook at Chuck's head, something shifted inside the legend's stance. Those who hung around the periphery of the ring saw its familiarity and braced for what was coming. Chuck countered, not with anger or panic, but with the gentle accuracy of a master. His counterattack was neither showy nor telegraphed. Basic, effective combination thrown with impeccable timing. Right block, left palm strike to generate space, then a sharp right hand that landed on Ramey's jaw. The blow wasn't spectacular to watch, but its impact was instantaneous. Ramey's movement forward halted as if he'd struck a wall. His eyes went out of focus for a fraction of a second, long enough for Chuck to return to neutral stance, hands up, balance intact. The message got through. I might have left it there, but did not. Ramey stumbled backward, his jaw touched with real incredulity. Blood from a split lip tinged his fingers. Red, fleshly evidence that the myth was more than rumor. The young champion's gaze shifted once more. Cockiness giving way to something darker, more desperate. Cornered awareness that a fighter sees when he realizes he may be out of his league. "Lucky shot," he grumbled, veering to his left, struggling to get himself back together. Chuck said nothing to the insult. He just shifted position to keep at maximum range. Hands still up, faces still intent, but relaxed. He wasn't battling Ramey's ego anymore. He was allowing Ramey to fight himself. In the broadcast booth, Jules's call had assumed the tone of a man watching something divine. What we're observing isn't physical ability, but the mental command that can only come with unwavering commitment to art. Chuck Norris isn't merely fending off punishes countering the whole manner of fighting that Delgado embodies. Aya nodded, slowly, her original skepticism utterly removed. It's like seeing two different languages. Delgado is yelling and Norris is, I don't know, speaking complete sentences. Just so. Jules concurred. And currently, young Ramey is receiving an object lesson in fluency. Down in the ring, that learning didn't cease. Ramey, having sampled Chuck's accuracy once, came in more tentatively. He feinted, jabbed, attempted to find holes to shoot into with movement and head fakes, demonstrating the technical ability that had earned him a title. Chuck read every motion, countering with subtle corrections that kept ideal defensive position without wasted motion. It was turning into a chess game, Ramey coming at Chuck with more and more complexity, Chuck parrying with calm precision. But with every blow, a pattern began to develop. Ramey struggling more, his breathing labored, while Chuck was still cool, his breathing steady, his actions sharp. The fans could feel this dynamic balance, their yells growing. More desultory, more musing. They came for their entertainment, but found themselves observing something nearer to philosophy, made flesh a demonstration of principles more profound than spectacle. Ramey, growing loss of control of the situation with each failed assault, ran back to one final attempt to regain the moment. He stepped back, arms wide open, playing to the crowd. "Is this all the legend has defense?" he shouted, voice betraying more weariness than his stance allowed. I'd heard that Chuck Norris was supposed to be deadly. The taunt lingered in the air, empty in light of what had already occurred. Some half-hearted shouts of encouragement arose from Ramey's diehards, but the majority of the arena sat in respectful silence, seeing the last-ditch strategy for what it was. Chuck's face remained impassive, but in his stantia a subtle redistribution of weight took place, a minute realignment of hands. To everyone else, nothing had altered. To those attuned to combat at its most fundamental level, the entire balance had altered. T-Bone noticed it at once. Oh, God, he groaned, angling away. Kid, I told you so. Ramey, misreading Chuck's realignment as hesitation, pushed the apparent advantage. Come on, old man. Show me something. Or was it all camera tricks? And the rest of his sentence disappeared as Chuck finally decisively moved. What followed wasn't the wild flurry of a movie fight scene or the technical exchange of a sport match. It was something more fundamental movement distilled to its purest essence. Chuck closed distance with two precise steps, intercepted Ramey's instinctive jab with a perfect parry, and delivered a combination of strikes. So fluid they appeared to be a single motion. Palm heel to create space, right cross to the body to lower guard, left hook that connected with surgical precision to Ramey's jaw. The young champion's head snapped back, eyes instantly going unfocused, his knees buckled, body suddenly forgetting the commands of a brain momentarily reset by perfect impact. He didn't fall dramatically or fly backward as in choreographed fight. She simply collapsed. Strings cut, consciousness temporarily suspended. Chuck stepped back immediately, hands returning to guard position out of habit rather than necessity. He stood calmly as Ramey crumpled to the canvas, neither celebrating nor acknowledging the stunned silence that had fallen over the arena. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved, no one spoke. 10,000 people held their breath, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Then reality rushed back in. Medical staff scrambled toward the ring. T-Bone vaulted over the ropes to reach his fallen fighter. Officials who had been uncertain about the unscheduled bout now swarmed around the ring, trying to regain control of a situation that had evolved beyond conventional management. In the center of this chaos, Chuck remained still, the eye of a storm. He had both caused and calmed. His breathing was even, his posture relaxed, but alert. He looked down at Ramey with neither triumph nor disdain, but with the quiet acknowledgement of a lesson delivered. As medics attended to the fallen champion, who was already beginning to stir, Chuck turned and walked calmly toward the ropes. The crowd, emerging from their shock, began to react first with scattered applause, then with growing volume until the arena filled with a roar unlike any that had come before. This wasn't the cheer of entertainment or tribal allegiance, but the sound of collective witness to something authentic and rare. Chuck paused at the edge of the ring, looking back once at Ramey, who was now sitting up, disorientation clear on his face. Their eyes met briefly across the canvas, teacher and student, in an unplanned but inevitable education. Then Chuck ducked between the ropes and descended the steps, moving with the same measured calm that had defined his entire presence. Ethan met him at the bottom, handing back his watch without comment. No words were necessary between men who had shared decades of understanding. As Chuck made his way back through the crowd, the chanting began soft at first, then swelling until it filled every corner of the Iron Circle arena. Chuck, Chuck, Chuck. He acknowledged the chant with a single slight nod, not in celebration of victory, but in recognition of something more meaningful, respect freely given, not demanded. In the broadcast booth, Jules and Aya sat in reverent silence, understanding that sometimes the most powerful commentary is no commentary at all. Some moments speak for themselves, requiring no interpretation or amplification. What had begun as a call-out had transformed into a moment that transcended sport, a collision between 2 eras, 2 philosophies, and 2 definitions of strength, one built on noise, the other on silence. And in that collision, silence had spoken volumes. The corridor leading from the arena floor to the backstage area of the Iron Circle buzzed with frantic activity. Event staff with clipboards and headsets rushed in every direction. Security personnel established impromptu perimeters, and medical teams wheeled equipment toward the ring where Ramey Delgado was still being assessed. Amid this chaos, Chuck Norris and Ethan Delroy walked unhurriedly like men strolling through a quiet park. "You didn't have to do that," Ethan said, his voice low enough that only Chuck could hear. Chuck adjusted his watch, securing it back on his wrist with methodical precision. "No," he agreed. "I didn't have to." The brief exchange held decades of insight between them. Chuck hadn't gotten in that ring to prove anything. He'd done it because something had to be shown. Not for himself, but for others. Behind them, the hallway was crowded with reporters and photographers who'd left their designated spots to pursue the actual story of the night. Security personnel created a cordon, keeping them at bay as Chuck and Ethan pressed on toward a secluded side room that had been set aside as their temporary haven. "Mr. Norris," voices shouted behind the security line. "Can we get a statement?" "How did it feel too?" Chuck didn't break pace or respond to the questions. He'd said all that was needed in the ring. When they arrived at the door to the private room, a young woman stood in their way. Ala Chen, tablet held tightly to her chest, eyes shining with professional resolve. "Mr. Norris," she started off, talking fast before security could step in. "Ala Chen, Sports Now Digital. I was in the broadcasting booth and I have no interviews," Ethan stated emphatically, taking a step between them. Chuck put a staying hand on his friend's shoulder, holding him back. "It's fine." He turned to Aya, his face neither discouraging nor encouraging, merely there. "You have a question, Eli?" Aya hesitated, suddenly realizing that the rehearsed introduction she'd made 100 times felt insufficient. In this instant, she breathed and asked simply, "Why did you take his challenge?" "You had no need to prove anything." The hall fell silent. Everyone in hearing range freezing to wait for the reply. Chuck looked at her for an instant, sensing something in her straightforwardness. A quest for comprehension, not titillation. When once again someone was repeatedly requesting a lesson, he spoke softly. At last, a teacher materializes. Before she could pursue, Chuck and Ethan walked past her into the private room, the door softly closing behind them. She remained in the hallway, fingers paused over her tablet, having just been given something far more valuable than the soundbite she'd been pursuing. Within the confines of the private room, Chuck took off his button-down shirt, exposing a plain black t-shirt underneath. He inspected his knuckles lightly reened, but otherwise untouched, and shrugged his shoulders with the discreet respect of a person who knew the mechanics of his own body very well. "They'll need you to say something," Ethan remarked while glancing at his phone. "Our people are already calling." Chuck nodded. Nothing to say. Ethan smiled a little. Figured as much. He put down his phone. How'd it feel being back in there? Chuck was thoughtful for a moment, framing the question not as small talk, but as something worthy of honest consideration. "Like riding a bicycle," he said finally. Then, with a flicker of a smile, "A very old bicycle." They exchanged a quick laugh, the easy camaraderie of men who had traveled far roads together. A knock at the door broke their instant of humor. Ethan stepped to answer it, protective reflexes still active. In the doorway stood Jules Kinsey, his broadcaster's tie loosened, his faces serious with respect. "Apologies for interrupting," Jules said. "They're attempting to work out what goes down next out there, and I thought you'd like to know." Chuck gestured for him to go on. "The kid Delgado's fine, bruised ego rather than anything else physical, but he's insisting on an official match. Claims what went down wasn't official, wasn't sanctioned." Ethan snorted. "He's still awake. He should take that as a victory and move on." Jules smiled for a brief moment. That would be the intelligent decision. He paused, then went on. "For what it's worth, I've been reporting battles for most of my life, and what I witnessed out there tonight." He shook his head for proper words. It was not skill alone. It was reality. Chuck looked at the old commentator with stoic nodding and professional recognition of another from a different field. "Thank you for informing us." Jules recognized the dismissive nod. Nodding respectfully, he moved backward out of the doorway, letting it swing shut behind him. As his footsteps faded down the hallway, Ethan turned to Chuck. "So, are you going to give the kid his real match?" Chuck sat down in a chair in the corner, sitting with the cautious deliberation of a man who had learned to save his strength as a second nature. "I already have." In the medical room across the arena, another, entirely different scene was playing out. Ramy Delgado insisted on sitting on an examination table and would not lie down when the doctor insisted. His lip was split open. A bruise was starting to form along his jaw, but his injuries palled in comparison to the tempest brewing behind his eyes. "I'm fine," he snapped, shoving away the penlight the doctor was attempting to shine in his eyes. "Stop treating me like I'm broken." Coach T-Bone stood in the corner, arms crossed, his weathered face set in lines of disappointment mixed with concern. He'd known this moment would come eventually, had tried to prepare for it, prevent it, postpone it, the inevitable. Crash between his fighter's inflated ego and reality. "You have to allow them to examine you properly," he said, his growly voice overriding Ramy's objections. "Routine procedure following any knockout." "I wasn't knocked out," Ramy argued, though everyone in the room knew better. "I slipped. The canvas was slippery." T-Bone shared a look with the doctor, the silent communication of adults handling a child's tantrum. The physician nodded and stepped away, allowing Ramy the room his ego required, if not the respect he needed. "Fine," the physician said, "but you're not going anywhere until I've had a chance to do an actual assessment." As the medical team backed away respectfully, T-Bone came forward to the examining table. He'd been with Ramy from the start, had watched the raw ability, the hunger, the desire, had seen him climb from local gyms to global limelight, had attempted to leave wisdom in addition to technique, had fallen short in that final area. Apparently, "What the hell were you thinking?" he asked softly. Ramy scowled at him. I was thinking about my career, my brand. Do you have any idea what this kind of moment does for exposure? The old man versus the new champion. It's marketing pure gold?" T-Bone shook his head slowly. "That old man could have finished your career tonight. Permanently. You're fortunate that he didn't." "Fortunate?" Ramy's voice rose to a sharp note. "There was no luck involved. He surprised me. It wasn't a fight. No ref, no rules, no stop." T-Bone's one-word response sliced through the whining like a knife. "Just stop. You got schooled tonight by a guy who has more discipline in his pinky than you've had in your entire career." Ramy's face reddened with rage. "I'm undefeated. 28-0. I've worked my ass off to get where I am." 28-1. T-Bone corrected softly. "And yes, you've labored over your body, your speed, your power, but never have you labored over the most important thing." He touched his temple. "In here, where real champions are created." Ramy turned away, his jaw grinding, unable to meet his coach's eye. The room descended into awkward silence, punctuated only by the muffled sounds of the arena outside the door. The crowd still abuzz with excitement, commentators still dissecting what they'd seen. Social media already going ballistic with videos and commentary. A young event coordinator stuck her head in the room. Mr. Delgado, the press wants to know if you're going to make a statement, and the promoter wants to know if you're serious about asking for an official bout." T-Bone inserted himself between Ramy and the coordinator. "He's not making any statements tonight. Doctor's orders. But no words," T-Bone insisted sternly. "And no protests. We're through for tonight." The coordinator nodded uncomfortably and withdrew, leaving T-Bone to turn back to his fighter with a sigh of relief. "Listen to me, kid. I know your pride is bruised more than your jaw at the moment, but you have to let this go. Learn from it. Grow from it." Ramy's eyes narrowed. "So I am supposed to just accept getting humiliated? Let the world believe Chuck Norris taught me? That's what you're saying?" "No," replied T-Bone, shaking his head. "My suggestion is to acknowledge that he did teach you and thank him for the lesson." Before Ramey had a chance to reply, the door opened once more. This time, Aya Chen entered. Her professional demeanor relaxed somewhat by concern. "Sorry to interrupt," she said. "I wanted to ask you if you were all right, Ramey, and whether you had anything to say about what went on out there." Rami stiffened on the examining table. Media training taking over by rote, he prepared to open his mouth and give what would surely be a well-rehearsed interview explaining unfair situations and possibilities of future redemption. T-Bone's hand on his shoulder halted him. In fact, the veteran coach had said, "We were just talking about what Ramey learned tonight, weren't we?" The query floated between theme and possibility, masquerading as challenge. Ramey's gaze darted between his coach and the reporter, sensing the gravity of a moment that would set more than tonight's storyline. In the hall outside the medical area, event personnel went on their hectic damage control. The official fight card was ruined. Expectations of the audience shattered. Schedules of broadcasts upset. And yet, amidst the logistical chaos, there was a certain undeniable electricity to the air of the buzz surrounding moments of genuine human drama. Chuck and Ethan were escorted by security personnel out of a side door, shunning the main halls where media had converged. As they were walking towards the parking lot, a tall figure emerged from the darkness. Jules Kinsey, who had clearly expected their path. "Apologies for the ambush," Jules said, raising his hands to indicate that he was not holding any recording device. "Just wanted to have a word." Off the record, Chuck hesitated, eyeing the commentator with measured consideration, then nodded once. Jules moved forward, his voice low. "They're already discussing how to set up an official bout. Pay-per-view, promotional tour, the books would make millions." He looked in Chuck's face for a reaction and saw none. "Just wanted you to know what's on the horizon." "Thank you," Chuck said matter-of-factly. "For what it's worth," Jules added, "what I saw in there tonight, it wasn't just about fighting. It was about something we've lost in this sport, something that can't be packaged or marketed." "It still exists," Chuck responded, just quieter than the noise around it. Jules nodded slowly, grasping the depth in that simple declaration. "Will you do it? The rematch they want?" Chuck's face remained unruffled, but his eyes contained a depth of conviction that responded before the words did. "There's no need." He heard the message. Whether he accepts it is up to him now. With that, Chuck and Ethan made their way toward their waiting vehicle, leaving Jules standing in the warm glow of the parking area lights, witness to a philosophy as much as an event. Within the arena, the crowd had begun to break up, though many remained, debating what they'd seen with the animated gestures of people who knew they'd witnessed something profound. Production staff tore down equipment while social media teams sat over screens, watching viewership totals surge beyond anything they'd predicted for the evening. In the broadcast booth, now devoid of personnel, one monitor still reflected the arena floor. The ring where it had happened, where flash had collided with substance, where noise had met silence. The canvas reflected no sign of the moment that had been created there. Yet something essential had shifted in the space. A lesson had been imparted, and like all true lessons, its effect would resonate long after the final bell had tolled. The instant Chuck Norris walked through the ropes, the Iron Circle arena changed. What had been a display of noise and flash coalesced into something elemental collision between two philosophies, two generations, two definitions of strength. Ramey Blitz Delgado bounced on his toes at the center of the ring, nervous energy masquerading as confidence. His earlier bluster remained in place on the surface, but those in close proximity to the ring observed his eyes keener now, more analytical, with the first authentic realization that he had crossed into virgin territory. "No referee, no rules," Ramey shouted, voice ringing out over the silent arena. "Or you want to do it proper." Chuck did not say anything. He just stepped into the middle of the ring with calculated steps, hands loose at his sides, stance neither aggressive nor defensive, just there. His concentration was complete, eyes never ceasing to be on Ramey, but somehow seeing everything. In the broadcast booth, Jules Kinsey whispered, "What we are seeing is not possible in contemporary combat. No sanctioning, no official procedures, simply the nature of combat stripped bare." Aiken came forward, professional reserve giving way to real interest. "Is this legal?" "We are past such thoughts now," said Jules. This was older than rules. A challenge, presented and accepted ringside. T-Bone Mercer stood with arms folded, expression hewn into resignation. He knew this was coming from the moment that Ramey had indicated that microphone towards Chuck had attempted to stop it, had not been able to, and now could do nothing but witness the inevitable unfold. He should have listened. T-Bone grumbled to no one in particular. The unofficiated state of the fight put everyone in suspense about procedure. There would be no bell. There would be no referee. The pause lingered, charged with tension, as 10,000 eyes held their breath in unison. Ramey was so uneasy with the quiet that he was the first to break it. Ramey charged forward with explosive velocity, delivering a lightning-fast jab, the same that had broken down so many foes. It was technically flawless, blindingly fast, completely committed, and it struck nothing but air. Chuck had moved not dramatically, not with sensational evading, but with the infinitesimal movement of a man who has spent years honing efficiency. Ramey didn't even have time to reset before Chuck was back in neutral position, hands lifted to a loose guard, face impassive. A low murmur ran through the onlookers. Ramey blinked, temporary confusion setting hard into resolve. He pushed on with a combination jab-cross hookage punch, delivered with championship-level quickness and accuracy, everyone landing only where Chuck had a moment ago previously occupied. "My God," Jules breathed, voice hardly audible by his microphone. "It's like seeing water run around stone." Frustration crossed Ramey's face. He upped his pace, tossed from various directions, incorporated feints and level changes, demonstrating the technical mastery that had earned him champion status. Chuck was reading every move, reacting with the smallest of adjustments for someone who had witnessed everything before, saving energy as Ramey burned through his. The reaction of the crowd started to change. The initial fervor dissipated into something deeper, something more respectful. They had arrived for entertainment and were seeing something more akin to art, the condensation of years of training into flawless efficacy. Ramey, feeling mastery of the action being taken from him, fell back, widened his arms, playing for the crowd. "Is this all you have, legend?" he jeered, the insult empty in the face of what was happening. Just going to bat all night. Chuck's face remained unmoved, but something changed in his stanza. Tenuous shifting of weight, a nearly undetectable shift in hand position. T-Bone saw it right away and closed his eyes for an instant. "Now it starts," he murmured, as if hearing the signal. Ramey pressed forward, sending a flurry of punches fueled by equal measures of skill and rage. For an instant, he looked like he might simply overwhelm Chuck by sheer numbers and dedication. These punches came in all directions, pushing the legend back against the ropes. The crowd came to life again, fearing a turning point, but those who knew about fighting at its most primal level saw something different. Chuck was not backing up. He was gathering data, letting Ramey show him patterns, timing, habits. As Ramey committed to the wide hook, Chuck shifted, not with the fierce savagery of youth or the frantic counter of pressure, but with the tranquil accuracy of complete mastery. He slid inside the guard of Ramey and landed a solitary palm to the chestnut launched with fury or maximum velocity, but with flawless placement and timing. The strike wasn't visually stunning, but its effect was instant. Ramey backed off, breathing soundly from his body, eyes wide with the newfound knowledge that he was feeling something more than he had ever known before. Before he had time to regroup, Chuck returned to neutral position, not capitalizing on the temporary success, not reveling, In the fleeting victory, merely returning to center, to balance, to readiness. That, Jules told audiences, voice low with awe, is the result when power is derived from exacting alignment, not brute strength. Physical manifestation of decades of controlled practice. Ram's face altered. The smirking grin erased, replaced by intensity of focus and the first hints of real respect. He came closer with caution now, guard up, movements more measured. He had entered this engagement in a bid to overpower, and now he was merely attempting to unravel a puzzle unlike any he had yet encountered. The dynamic became more complex. Ramy striking with greater sophistication, Chuck parrying with tranquil precision, a dance of motion, each man reading the other's intentions before they became reality. Yet with each parry, a picture appeared. Ramy straining, gasping, while Chuck never shifted, his breathing smooth, his movement sharp. In a fit of anger, Ramy overextended on, an uppercut. Chuck responded not with fury or overhanding it, but with precision surgery. Block, redirect, and a single blow that landed on Ramy's jaw. The young champion's head recoiled, legs briefly losing coordination. He lurched, regained balance, and ran fingers across his lip, coming away with a hint of blood. The tangible proof that legends aren't forged out of myths. Lucky shot, Ramy grumbled, moving more warily, realization creeping in that he had grossly overestimated. Chuck did not respond to the remark. He just stayed put, arms up, balance exquisite, neither advancing nor receding. His intent came across in action, not words. "I'm here when you're ready to go on." The crowd had slipped into a silence unlike any that had come before it not. The stunned silence but of shared witness to something real and precious. They had arrived for spectacle, but were left with something more. Ramy, the instant gliding away from him, made one last desperate lunge back towards it. He went with every ounce of technique he possessed. Briefly laid aside for sheer ferocity and determination, Chuck read the assault perfectly. When Ramy was fully devoted, the legend glided with the economy born of thousands of hours of training. Parry, shift, wait, and one deliberate counter that struck Ramy's temple. The blow wasn't sensational, but its outcome was final. Ramy was frozen in place, eyes unfocusing, legs abruptly forgetting what to do. He fell to the canvas, not in melodramatic collapse, but in the abrupt abandonment of consciousness, suspended, momentarily. Chuck retreated at once, hands falling to guard out of habit instead of need. He remained standing as Ramy folded onto it, neither gloating nor reacting to the stunned hush that descended upon the arena. No one moved for 3 beats. No one said a word. And then reality came crashing back, with doctors racing to the ring. T-Bone vaulting over the ropes to his injured fighter, and the slow buildup of noise as 10,000 people absorbed what they had seen. Chuck walked calmly to the ropes and turned. The lesson had been taught. If it would be learned was yet to be determined. 6 months went by. In a small gym on Sacramento's edge, Ramy Delgado trained a heavy bag with mechanical facility. His strokes grew tighter, more efficient, free of extraneous motion. No one filmed his training. No one tweeted about his progress. Only the rhythmic knock of impact, breathing, and concentration. T-Bone Mercer sat in the corner, his creased face expressionless. 6 months of going back to basics had changed his fighter in ways apparent only to those who knew where to look. The physical transformation was understated, the internal one deep. Time tone summoned him to check his stopwatch. Ramy moved back, breathing held in check though his effort had been intense. He slowly unwrapped his hands, no longer hasty about doing it, but integrating it into the training. "Your transfer of weight is better," T-Bone said. "Less wasted motion." Ramy nodded, taking the observation without the defensive pride that would have tinctured his reply 6 months ago. "Still dropping my right after the hook." "You picked up on that." A warm note of approval crept into T-Bone's tone. "That's improvement, too." They go to a small office next to the training floor room, specifically without the championship belts and promotional materials that once filled Ramey's space. On the desk was a cream-colored envelope, handwritten on the front with the name of Ram. Arrived this morning. T. Bone nodded in its direction. Courier brought it. Ramey opened the envelope right away, knowing the importance. 6 months to the exact date since that night at the Iron Circle, which had redirected his course. 6 months of being out of the limelight. Turning down interviews, rebuilding not only technique but outlook. The message within was concise, written in strong, neat script. Mr. Delgado, if you still want an official fight, I'll be at Warriors Path Dojo in San Bernardino this Saturday at 10 a.m. No cameras, no hype, no crowd, just the simplicity of what we do and why we do it. Your coach is familiar with the joint. Respectfully, Chuck Norris. Ramey passed the note to T-Bone, who read it and nodded slowly. The old Circle of Masters Dojo, he explained. Holy ground for traditional martial artists. No cameras? Ramey saw his tone devoid of disappointment. No audience. Surprise you? Ramey thought about the question sincerely. 6 months ago? Absolutely. Now? He shook his head. It's perfectly logical. Saturday morning dawned crisp and cool. The Warriors Path Dojo was plain converted warehouse with plain wooden doors and limited windows. No sign proclaimed its use. No promotional signs adorned its walls. This place has character, T-Bone said as they packed up their gear. Some of America's best martial artists trained on these floors. Within the dojo was simple but elegant polished wooden floors, white walls with nothing other than calligraphy, and black and white photos of masters who were long gone. Natural light streamed in through high windows, forming patterns throughout the training area. At the center, wearing a plain white gi, was Chuck Norris. At 70-plus years old, his posture was impeccable, straight back, but not stiff, balanced, but not strained. He was doing a slow kata, movements smooth with controlled precision. Ramey paused at the perimeter of the training floor, taking off his shoes before stepping onto the highly polished wood. T-Bone lingered by the entrance, knowing that what ensued next between the two fighters was private. Chuck finished his kata, then stepped forward to nod his acknowledgement to Ramey with a slight bow martial artist to martial artist. Thank you for your visit, Mr. Delgado, he said, voice ringing clearly in the empty room. Thank you for inviting me, Ramey answered, humility sincere in his words. For the next hour, the two men trained together, not as adversaries, but as practitioners of a common art. They started with basic footwork and stance, then moved on to timing drills, combination strikes, and finally light sparring. Their exchange had none of the tension that had marked their initial meeting. Instead, it had the intent respect of craftsmen, respecting each other's trade. After a particularly silky exchange of moves, they stopped to drink water. Ramey mopped sweat from his brow, a question arising that had bothered him for 6 months. May I ask you something? He said. Chuck nodded and took a deliberate drink of water. That evening at the Iron Circle, Ramey started cautiously. You could have humiliated me totally, made it far worse. Why didn't you? Chuck pondered the question thoughtfully. Because the aim of a lesson isn't to obliterate the student, he said at last. It's to open a doorway to growth. Ramey took it in, recognition dawning in his gaze. I've been angry for months, not with you, but with myself, for how blind I'd been. Recognizing blindness is the start of sight, Chuck answered. Lots of fighters never get that far. They continued practicing, moving into more sophisticated exchanges of talk through movement, each man learning the other's rhythms and responses. There was beauty in their interaction, the kind that only comes when skill meets respect. After 2 hours, Chuck called a stop. Both men were breathing harder now, sweating evidence of real effort. Your progress is noticeable, Chuck said, not only in technique. I had good teachers, Ramey answered, looking over toward T-Bone, once I was willing to listen. Chuck nodded. The offer remains open if you desire it. Ramey looked at him inquiringly. An official fight, Chuck explained, if that still is what you're after. Ramey was silent for a moment, actually considering rather, then automatically reacting. The old Ramey would have jumped at the chance, the payday, the limelight, the opportunity for public rehabilitation. But the man standing in this dojo had other priorities now. I think he said cautiously, that would be missing the point of these 6 months. Something like approval flickered in Chuck's eyes. Explain. Fighting you in the arena was about my ego. Ramey said, training with you today was about the art, about improvement. He nodded his head in response, reverting to spectacle after being introduced to substance. It would be a regression. The dojo went silent, the importance of this development hanging between them. T-Bone's face softened with quiet pride. There are other ways to give back what you've learned, Chuck said after a time, if you're interested. In the weeks that followed, the fighting world was abuzz with rumors of Ramey's disappearance. Then, without fanfare or marketing hype, a plain video turned up on his long, inactive accounts. No flashy opening, no music, just Ramey sitting in the plain Sacramento gym. 6 months ago, I thought I understood what fighting was all about, he started out, his voice introspective rather than theatrical. I thought it was about dominating, proving something to the world. The video contained sparsely captured shots of the Iron Circle night, then cut to new shots. Ramey instructing at community centers, working with veterans, teaching at-risk youth. I'm retiring from competitive competition, he declared simply. Not because I'm not able, but because I found something more valuable to seek out. The last shot was of Ramey and T-Bone standing in front of a refurbished storefront. Fundamentals first. The humble sign read, a dojo dedicated to imparting martial arts as a method for personal betterment, not physical dominance. In a small San Bernardino dojo, Chuck Norris viewed the video on Ethan's tablet with quiet contentment. Think he means it? Ethan asked as it ended. Chuck set down the tablet, his expression thoughtful. Time will tell, but recognizing the path is the first step to walking it. You could have promoted the rematch, Ethan noted. Would have been the biggest payday in years. Chuck smiled slightly. Some things are worth more than money. Like what? Like knowing that sometimes silence speaks louder than any punch. 1 year after the night at the Iron Circle Arena, afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows of Fundamental's first dojo. The modest facility had established itself not through flashy marketing, but through consistent results and quiet reputation. Its programs ranged from traditional martial arts training to specialized classes for veterans, trauma survivors, and at-risk youth. Rami Delgado moved among his students, offering adjustments and encouragement with the patient attention of someone who had discovered that teaching reveals as much as it transmits. The transformation in him wasn't just philosophical manifested in his measured movements, his attentive listening, his genuine interest in each student's journey. T-Bone observed, from his corner office position to overlook the training floor. At 71, he had scaled back his physical instruction, but remained the dojo's emotional anchor, living connection to traditions that predated spectacle and commercialization. The front door chimed softly. Aya Chen, now senior features editor at Combat Arts Quarterly, entered and surveyed the training space with professional curiosity. Miss Chen, T-Bone greeted her, rising from his desk. This is a surprise. Good surprise, I hope, she replied. I'm here about the profile we discussed on the dojo's first anniversary. T-Bone nodded. Ramey's finishing a class. Should be done shortly. Isla remained standing, watching through the office window. It's different than I expected, she admitted. When he first announced this venture, I was skeptical. Thought it might be a publicity stunt. You weren't alone, T-Bone acknowledged. Old reputations die hard, but this is the real deal, she observed, watching Ramey work patiently with a struggling teenage student. I've interviewed dozens of his students for the piece. The impact he's having, especially with the veterans program, it's remarkable. T-Bone smiled slightly. Sometimes the greatest gifts come from our greatest humiliations, if we're willing to learn from them. For the next hour, T-Bone shared his perspective on what had transpired that night and in the months that followed the internal struggles Rami had faced. The difficult process of rebuilding not just a fighting style, but an identity. The shift from external validation to internal standards. The hardest part wasn't physical, he explained. It was confronting the emptiness beneath the success. Rami had achieved everything he thought he wanted. Fame, money, championship belts, and discovered it wasn't fulfilling him. And Chuck Norris? Ayla asked. What role did he play in this transformation beyond that initial night? More than most people know, T-Bone replied. After their private training session, he became something of a mentor, not hands-on daily instruction, but occasional guidance, phone calls, shared wisdom from his own journey. I had no idea they remained in contact. Neither did the public. And that's exactly the point. True growth rarely happens in the spotlight. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the office door. Rami entered, towel around his neck, expression curious as he recognized Aya. Ms. Chen is here for that anniversary profile we discussed, T-Bone explained. Rami nodded, extending his hand in greeting. Nice to see you again, Ayla. It's been a while, almost a year, she confirmed. You've been elusive. A small smile touched his lips, intentionally so. Aya looked between them, journalists' instincts detecting something significant in their exchange. There's more to this story than either of you have shared publicly, isn't there? Rami considered her for a moment, then nodded toward the window. Why don't we walk? I'd like to show you something. He led her to a small alcove near the back of the Tohoa space, set apart from the main training area dedicated to reflection rather than practice. On the wall hung a framed letter and a black-and-white photograph Chuck Norris and Rami in training, GS seated in meditation posture. This was taken 3 months after our private session. Rami explained when he invited me to join a small group of students he mentors personally, not for competition or public recognition, but for preservation of the deeper traditions of martial arts. He continued teaching you, she said, understanding, dawning in her voice. Teaching implies a one-way transfer of knowledge, Rami corrected gently. What developed was more of an exchange. He shared wisdom earned through decades of practice, and I offered perspectives on how those traditions could remain relevant for new generations. And this dojo, his suggestion, Rami acknowledged. He believed I had something valuable to offer. Not just technical skills, but the experience of finding my way back to what matters. Aya absorbed this journalist's mind, already reshaping the story she had come to write. Why keep this private? In today's world of constant social media presence and personal branding, this kind of redemption arc would be marketing gold. Rami smiled. That's exactly why it needed to stay private. The moment something becomes content, it becomes performative, rather than authentic. He gestured around the dojo. What we're building here isn't a brand or a platform. It's a sanctuary for people seeking something real in a world increasingly dominated by appearances. The front door chimed again, admitting a group of veterans arriving for the evening's specialized class. T-Bone excused himself to greet them, leaving Rami and Aya by the alcove. I should let you prepare for your class, she said, gathering her notes. Thank you for sharing this with me. It changes how I'll approach the piece. How so? I came looking for a story about transformation, she explained. But I think what I found is something about transmission. How values and wisdom pass between generations, sometimes in unexpected ways. As Aya prepared to leave, a final question occurred to her. The night at the Iron Circle when you challenged him and he responded, did you ever wonder if he planned it that way? If he somehow knew what would happen? Rami weighed this consideration. I've wondered that so many times. The fact is, I don't believe he planned it, but I do believe he saw the moment for what it was, an opportunity for a lesson that could only be learned by doing, not by talking. And the lesson was that true power isn't about controlling others. Ramy just said, "It's about mastering yourself, and that process never ends, not with championships, not with fame, not even with victory." He looked at the arriving veterans. It goes on every day with every decision about how we apply what we've learned. That night, later in a Texas home, Chuck Norris hung up the phone after speaking monthly with Ramy. Ethan, who had been reading nearby, looked up quizzically. "The first anniversary of the dojo," Chuck said. "They're fine, doing good." "You were correct about him," Ethan noted. "Saw something under the bluster." Chuck nodded, a small smile on his lips. Sometimes people just need to be reminded about who they actually are under who they're pretending to be. Think he'll ever get back into competition? Maybe, Chuck pondered. But if so, it will be for other reasons, with other purpose. Beyond, the Texas sunset painted the sky in stunning huza. Natural, beauty requiring no hype, no comment, no approval beyond existence. Chuck watched it in easy silence. Living the principle that had shaped his life and now guides his legacy. True strength whispers loudest when it does. And sometimes the greatest response to noise is not more noise, but the sort of silence that results from complete certainty in who you are and what you believe. Coming up next, 2 more great stories waiting for you. Just click the picture you want to see and it will take you there. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.